We are here today with Dr. Andrea Bertozzi from the University of California, Los Angeles, and this is the Confluence series of interviews. She just finished giving a very nice talk on math biology, and Dr. Bertozzi, we would like to know a little bit about the path that it took you to where you are today professionally.
Where should I begin?
From as far as you remember that, had to do with the fact that now you are today a researcher in math biology.
Well, actually, so let me correct you. I'm not a researcher in math biology. I'm a researcher in applied mathematics. And the biology is one application I've worked on, but I've worked on other applications maybe even more so than this. So I feel, as I told the students in the talk today, my background in biology is rather weak, but I have a pretty strong background in physics. So I try to leverage that to work on problems in biology and other fields that have a physics component to them. Mm-hmm. So my first experience with science that I remember was from a very young age. I think I mentioned this to the students that when I was a kid, my father's a physicist, and he would take my sisters and I and my mother to the Science Museum in Boston where I grew up. So as a small child, I was taken to this place many times, and I was always encouraged from a young age to study something in science. And the problem with the museum was that I liked everything in it. I really didn't find that I was gravitating towards one thing over another. So that was, at a young age, I felt that I liked all of science. And when I started learning mathematics at around the age of 5, I got very excited. For some reason, I found this more exciting than just about anything else that I was exposed to. Mm-hmm. Very simple things, like I remember learning about negative numbers when I was, in elementary school or first grade, and I thought this was very cool. Maybe more so than other people. And I found as a child and growing up through grade school that I had a knack for mathematics. It came very easily to me, and I couldn't understand why other people didn't see it the way I did. And so I felt that there was a pretty good chance that whatever I did for a profession, that it would probably involve mathematics, but I wasn't really sure about what I wanted to do until I got to college. And I started taking physics and math, and I liked them both, and I was sort of trying to decide between those two areas and maybe astronomy. And I finally decided that I really liked physics because it was an application of mathematics. And so that led me towards a math degree and getting into applied mathematics, because that way I could continue getting involved with science without having to major in any specific area of science. So I think that summarizes it.
Well, here, I mean, the program that most of the students here are at is a cubic program, in which we make our students take some mathematics up to calculus. Mm-hmm. I mean, some of them they go into differential equations. Yep. You are an applied mathematician. Yep. As part of your applied math, you are merging mathematics with some of the biology problems, or maybe some of the other applications. Yep. that you do using mathematics. Can you tell us a little bit about, so that to explain these students, why do we think that it's important for them to learn mathematics within their field of biology?
Indeed. Well, there are a lot of problems out there. I would say the majority of new science problems require some technical background and require understanding of the problems at a quantitative level. And once you are trying to understand your problem at a quantitative level, especially if it's a complex problem, it sort of inherently needs some sort of mathematics, because that's the quantitative side of it. Now, whether it's calculus or statistics or what, it just depends on the problem. But if you work on any problem in science that involves sort of continuum changes of state, looking at how things change instantaneously in time, then that's calculus. That's a derivative right there. So you find that you need that that sort of construction in many fields. I mean, economics, obviously physics, but certainly in biology and in other areas. And on the other hand, if you're looking at a big data set and you're trying to understand trends in the big data set, so it's discrete, then statistics could be very important. Understanding statistical properties of the data. So tomorrow I'm giving another talk. This is not a biology talk, it's on crime, but it does involve people and human behavior, so there's a psychological component to it. And we have made heavy use of statistics in our work, as well as calculus too. And I'll explain, for those of you who want to come to the talk tomorrow, it's going to be a little less math and a little more application, but I'll explain with different kinds of models for the same problem how one type of model might require some calculus and the other type maybe a lot of statistics.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Now, tell us a little bit about the type of obstacles that you have faced throughout while you were a student, now that you're a professional mathematician, a professor at a large university, and how do you overcome these obstacles?
I have to be honest with you, I feel that my life has been not too many obstacles. I've had a lot of opportunities. I've been very fortunate to have a supportive family. My parents encouraged me from a young age to go into a technical field. When I was going to college, I was given a list of subjects not to major in. And the ones that weren't on that list were basically in science and engineering and math. I come from a family of immigrants. My father's family, they were Italian immigrants, very poor, who somehow managed to send all 5 kids to college. Really pushed education. My mother's family they were immigrants from Canada, from a small fishing village in Canada. And they didn't push education, but my mother herself felt it was very important. So I grew up in a household with 2 parents who were, my generation, we were middle class rather than poor immigrants. And I was pushed from a young age to do well in school and encouraged to explore my interests. So I feel like I had a lot of opportunities that other kids probably didn't have. And I was also born with apparently a brain that can do advanced mathematics. And I was encouraged to do that. I'm from the generation that just barely in the generation that's post-Title IX. So in terms of being a woman in mathematics, I was actually encouraged from a young age. And I really didn't experience too many barriers. There weren't too many women doing what I was doing. I can remember even at the age of 6 being in an accelerated math class with 9 boys and myself. So I got used to being the only girl or one of a few, doing what I was doing, but I wasn't discouraged. In fact, I think in a way it helped encourage me because when I can remember at one point working alone on problems, whereas the boys were working together, and then I would get the highest grade on the test because I had to do it all myself. So I felt that I was always encouraged. I had supportive parents. I went to an excellent college, great training. And in my adult life, I've had a husband. I've been married for, almost 24 years now. And my husband has been very supportive in my career. So I think that there are barriers to everyone, but I feel like I've been in a very good situation. I sort of have to look for the problems rather. And so one of the things that I do as an educator, I work with a lot of students who come from different backgrounds. And even though my background personally was a fairly easy one, I have a lot of close relatives who grew up in harsher environments. And being at a public institution like UCLA, we see a broad spectrum of the population. And so I try to help students that maybe need a little more advice because they don't have someone at home. who can, who hasn't been to college. There may be no one in their family has been to college, and they may need more advice, career advice about what they can do with a math degree than they might be able to get at home. So I try my best to help the students who maybe come from different backgrounds. Yeah. So that's not answering your question, but it's sort of it's the best answer I can give you.
Very good.
Yeah.
See, in our program, in the Cubic program, I mean, one of our goals is to have as many students graduating and moving into a career of research into the biomedical sciences.
Great.
So as much information as we can give them about, making a decision on that, it would be great. And another thing that I would like, since you have followed that path and research work is pretty demanding, how do you balance your work, your research work, your daily work at the university with the rest of your life?
I think that's a good question, the work-life balance. Well, okay, so I think to keep it in perspective, I mean, I have a PhD, I'm a professional, and I have a lot of friends and colleagues who also are working professionals, but not necessarily in research. So when I think about the work-life balance and how to manage my career, I try to put it in a broader context. So, I compare my job, for example, to colleagues who are medical doctors. My husband has an engineering degree and a business degree, and he works for a company, so that's a different work environment. And frankly, I feel that the job I have is a privileged job. I get to work on my own ideas. I get to come up with these ideas. I do have to find funding for them, so that is a stress. But compared to many friends and colleagues that have advanced degrees, I feel that I am in a very special situation with the kind of work that I can do. It's a luxury to get up in the morning and have a crazy idea, and to call somebody up in Washington and say, hey, what do you think about this? And I would say, 8 times out of 10, nothing happens, but there's those 2 times out of 10 that conversation leads to the program that I just showed you. This 10 years of work that we've done at UCLA started with a phone call to a program manager in one of the funding agencies. And that's how it started. And it led to a number of PhD theses, probably tens of papers, whole new theories. And so that's just the nature of our work. If you're going to be a researcher, a scientific researcher, you have to wear many hats. So you are a scientist, you are also an entrepreneur. You are a mentor, right? You're an educator. You have to wear many, many hats, and you have to be willing to juggle those hats. But I don't look at it as a hardship. I look at it as an opportunity to be able to do things that other people only dream about, that I actually get to do in real life. It's a privilege to have the job that I have. That's what gets me out of bed in the morning. And yeah, there is work-life balance. So when I'm tired, I rest. There are times when I say, tonight is a night I'm going to put my feet up and watch television. Right? I'm going to watch NCIS or something, right, on TV and not think about my research. So you have to be able to turn it off. But as I said, I look at my job as a privilege, and I have many friends and colleagues who don't have the wonderful job that I have, who come home complaining about so-and-so did such and such, or they're dealing with this annoyance or that annoyance, and they don't get to follow their dreams, which is what I get to do. So I think you have to put it in perspective. And if you want to go into research, you're doing it because you have dreams that you want to make into reality, and that you have the ability and opportunity to do that. And that's why you do it, and that's why I did it.
So, going back to our students, any in our program, any word of advice or encouragement for students at this stage when they are in their undergraduate career about having a professional career in doing research, or anything that you can? I mean, you partly answered that question before, saying that it's
I mean, one thing you should keep in mind is that, you know, life is not always easy, and you're going to have to work. And if you want a sort of a serious job, right, where you make a good salary and you have an advanced degree, regardless of whether it's research or something else, you know, you have to work hard. You know, I mean, it may not be physically demanding work. It may be more intellectual work, management, things like that. But you are going to be working. So you want to pick a career that you're going to be happy, that you're going to be able to come to an audience like this and say what I just said. And it might be research or it might be something else. But you want to find something you're really passionate about, that you get up in the morning and you get excited about going to work because you're doing what you like to do. And I would encourage you all to get advanced degrees if you can, because I think you have more opportunities. I mean, one thing that I really love about my job is I get to have ideas and I get to see them to fruition. But in order to do that, I have to have experience and I have to be able to, you know, wear all these different hats. That's not something you can do with just an undergraduate degree, at least not in research. Maybe in business, but not in research. And even in business, it helps if you have a background in accounting, you know, and the sorts of things you learn in graduate school. So, yeah.
So going back, I mean, you gave us a very nice talk before, and you were talking about how your research is being partly funded by these different organizations. You were talking about the Army, you were talking about the Navy,
and also the National Science Foundation.
And you talked about some of the results that they came out of that funding. Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, how your research, that research transitioned into particular applications that they were of use to these organizations that they were funding your research?
Sure. Actually, the best example I have is the one that I'm going to show tomorrow, but I'd like to mention it since you asked the question. And that's from our work on crime modeling. And so, I also am part of a group that's very active working with the Los Angeles Police Department. So this is not biology, but actually some of the models we use come from other areas of science. So both ecology and, strangely enough, earthquakes. So it turns out that the earthquake model has made a huge impact. So one of the things that we looked at was something called repeat victimization. So if there's a crime that occurs, that crime could lead to other crimes. So, you know, if you're breaking into a house, maybe you didn't have time to grab everything, but you remember one of the things in the house and you know where it is, and you're going to go back and get it. So that's a repeat. That would be a repeat. Or maybe when you broke into this one house, you saw the next door neighbor's house and you thought, I can get into that house too. I'm going to come back and break into that house. These are anecdotal examples of why a crime might lead to another crime. But in reality, what you can do is take the data in a city like Los Angeles and Miami as well, I imagine. Right? Miami actually has very similar geography in some sense to LA, in that you've got an ocean, you've got a very spread out area with a lot of, you know, fairly high density, but not too high density, but over a fairly large geographic area, not just the city, but the whole greater Miami area. So in Los Angeles, we have the same kind of geography, a little hillier, I guess, right? But otherwise very similar. And so we were able to look at data over a fairly large area of Los Angeles and discover that this pattern of repeat activity one could characterize with a fairly simple model that comes from earthquakes, modeling aftershocks of earthquakes. And you could actually use it to do predictive policing. And this was a discovery that one of the postdocs in my group, George Mueller, made, published in the Journal of the American Statistical Association. This is a statistical model. And within the same year of that publication, that idea turned into a software package used by the Santa Cruz Police Department that resulted in a 27% reduction in crime the first month they used that program. Today, over 30 cities worldwide are using this software. There's a company that was formed, and this is just a few years later. So we went from basic research in a journal publication to software being used in the field, reducing crime in cities like Seattle and Atlanta. Just a few years later. That's really almost unheard of for basic research to go that quickly. I mean, in contrast, look at the internet. When I was a kid, 13-year-old, I had an account on one of the ARPANET computers. This was in 1978. And when did the internet go commercial? The early 1990s, okay? Mm-hmm. So that's 15 years later. And already you could think of the ARPANET as applied, right? It wasn't a journal publication, right? So the internet, of course, is the great example that the funding agencies, DARPA in particular, they like to trot out as an example of something that has really changed the world and started as basic research. So the example from my group that I think is probably the most spectacular in terms of going from basic research to something that's making a difference in society is the predictive policing program. And that wasn't even work that I did directly. It was mainly work done by a couple of postdocs at UCLA, very good ones, very bright ones, yeah.
So, well, I will encourage all of you guys in the audience to attend tomorrow's lecture, where Dr. Bertozzi is going to be talking about this application of mathematics to police work. Mm-hmm. And so let's now give a chance to the students in this audience to, in the context of this particular interview, any curiosity, any question you may have for Dr. Bertozzi that might pertain to your future careers in the biomedical sciences. Any questions?
I wanted to ask, how are these models put together? Like, I guess it's based on statistical data, but I want to know more details about how are they put together.
Sure. Can I ask you which models, the biology models that we work with?
Yeah, any model.
Or some of the crime? Or?
Let's say the crime one.
Well, so if you come to my talk tomorrow, you'll see that I'm going to talk about a bunch of different problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think the best way to describe the kind of modeling we do in my group is mainly what we do is we become an expert in a particular area of science where we know the mathematics very well. And then because we're mathematicians, we can have ideas about how to take that type of model and apply it in a completely different area of science. So we're using the math to connect one area to another one. And I find this really a lot of fun to take. So for example, some of those swarming models that I showed you they're sort of inspired by math from other fields, like the work that we've done in fluid dynamics, 20 or 30 years ago, to model eddies in the ocean without fish, just the fluid itself. The same mathematics turns out to be relevant for modeling the biology. That's just a simple example. And then for the crime modeling, I mean, we have a couple of different examples, but the earthquakes is probably the most fantastic one, where we take well-known models for aftershocks of earthquakes, and we can fit the crime data to the same class of models, and it's just a small number of parameters. So this is one thing I should say. If you're getting into statistical modeling, you always want to have the smallest number of parameters as possible to describe the data. I mean, sometimes you need more. So for example, in our model, we look at, an example would be gang crime, right? So you have a couple of different gangs, and they're attacking each other. One of the gang may go to the other gang's territory and try to shoot somebody, and then they go back and try to shoot the other one. And we have, of course, in LA, we have neighborhoods with a lot of gang activity. The Hollenbeck division of LAPD, you can have hundreds of crimes that are thought to be gang-related, unsolved crimes every year. And we have some solved crimes, too. So we can use the solved crimes sort of as our control. And what we want to do is try to find the smallest number of parameters that will accurately describe the data. So with retaliatory crime, you don't expect the events to be uncorrelated, right? You expect that one event will probably trigger another event. And that's the idea with the earthquake models, is that you try to figure out which event is starting things and what the trigger is. And in particular, if I'm in my gang and I go over to your territory and do something to your gang, what is the likelihood of the response and how quickly is it going to happen, right? Those are different parameters. So instead of having a simple model for events happening like a Poisson process where you assume that they're completely independent, what we use it's called a Hawkes process. It's a self-exciting point process model where you have 3 parameters. You have a background rate of violence that is like a Poisson model, independent events, just random. Okay, today I decide to go do something without any provocation. But once you have that event, then there is provocation, and you may have a repeat event that happens really because of something already occurring. So you need a parameter for that, and you need 2 parameters really. How likely is it to happen and how quickly does it happen? So that's a 3-parameter model. Background rate, the time for retaliation, and the likelihood of retaliation. And that is the Hawkes process model that we're using essentially for all, not just gang crimes, but for many different types of crime in Los Angeles. And we're using it to not only to understand historical data, but to predict where and when the new events are going to occur. Yeah.
So first of all, I want to comment that to relate earthquake model to crimes, that's pretty ingenious. I would never have ever even thought of that.
Right.
But that ties into my question of how do you get these ideas of these relationships? Do you have just a crystallized knowledge, or experience of time that you can see these relationships? Or?
I'll tell you what, I think that it's because we are, first and foremost, experts in the mathematics, right? So that mathematics, it's not something we have to learn as a tool to understand the science that we want to do. Rather, it is what we work with, and in some sense, my head thinks about the world in terms of equations, right? I mean, it's crazy to think that way, but that's how I think. And so when you think of, okay, I see this thing, an equation pops into my head, I see something that looks like that thing over there in a completely different field. It's like pattern recognition, right? Maybe we can use the same equation. And then you start getting into, then you have to get into the details. Then we have to actually learn the science, right? So another example is, it's also a gang example, but it's looking at territories and looking at, using graffiti, right, to define gang tags, to define the territories and to mark the territories. And we wanted to model this as a population, like an ecology model. And it turns out that there's a beautiful study that was done in Yellowstone with coyotes, who also mark their territories and who have well-defined packs. And so we wrote a paper where we looked at, what can we take from the ecology literature to model gang crimes, and how can we look at the gang data and the crime data as somehow defining the model, right? And it's a very different process. So what you end up with is the mathematics looking the same, but the science being very different, right? And so I found this kind of fascinating, that when you're an ecologist, you can go out into the field, you can do field work, you can put radio collars on coyotes and track them and get a picture of where the population lives. You can do this with sharks and whales. I mean, every once in a while I read about some shark that, the shark is now here. There are special sharks that are being tracked. There are wildlife in California that are being tracked right now, and every once in a while one of them shows up in the LA Times. We can't do this with gang members, right? I mean, you could say, the paparazzi maybe could go out and take pictures of them, but that's not right. That's not the science, right? So you can't track gang members, but we have a lot of evidence about their behavior that we could track that the ecologists couldn't. So, for example, the way coyotes mark their territory is using scent markings, and those coyotes have good noses, they can smell the different scents. I don't think I could smell those scents. I don't think we have any scientific way of cataloging that. And it's, but we can track the individual animals. Whereas with the gang members, we're certainly not going to put radio collars on the gang members. But if they put a tag on the side of a building that's out in public, we can sure take a record of that, right? So it's very interesting, the differences in what happens at the level of field data and using data and the scientific side of it, in contrast to the fact that the mathematics may be almost identical. I find this very fascinating, the connection between the mathematics and the science going from one field to another. Yeah, sure.
You're advocating pursuing a graduate degree, right?
If that's what you want to do.
How does what's the job market comparative for an MS in math versus a PhD?
Okay, that's an excellent question. Yeah, I don't get asked this question too much from our students, but occasionally I do. And I have one response, which is a little flippant, and since you're recording me, I'm not sure I should say it in the same language, but, I think that, in fact, I know that an MS versus a PhD, the types of jobs that you can work at, and more importantly, the amount of
responsibility you're going to be allowed to have, there's a huge difference with a PhD versus an MS. Now, if you want a job, if you really don't want to go into research, which is fine, so for example, if you wanted to go into industry where you're working much more, hands-on and more on the business side of things, then an MBA might be a better degree, or a science version of it. Some of the schools, like MIT Sloan School, for example, has a more science-y version of the MBA. That could be a good choice versus a PhD in math. So I think what's important is to think about, what type of job you want, but don't shy away from having ambitions for a job with responsibility, because with responsibility comes opportunity to be able to do many more things. With an advanced degree, you have access to jobs that have responsibility, but also that allows you to be able to do things at a very creative level. Rather than following someone else's directions, you get to figure out what directions people should be following. And you may, at your age, you may not quite, understand exactly what that means, what that's going to mean when you're 40 years old. But, you only get to do this once. And speaking as somebody who's already past the age of 40, it's a heck of a lot of fun to have a job with a lot of responsibility doing what you want to do, because you can move mountains if you have that kind of situation. So again, follow your dreams, and don't be shy about trying things that you're not sure you can accomplish if they are things that you want. A PhD may seem like a scary thing. It's going to be another 4 or 5, maybe 6 years of school. If that career path is your dream, then do it. It's not that bad. You're not making a lot of money as a student, but you're well taken care of. And one thing I should say, I don't know how many of you know this, but if you go into a PhD program in the United States, you're a US citizen or a permanent resident, by and large, they are going to be paying you to go to school. Not med school, right? But PhD programs in science and engineering, they're going to be paying you to go to school. This is not a situation where you're going to be going into a lot more debt. In fact, the other thing is that you don't have to pay off your student loans until after you finish the advanced degree. So you get to put all of that on hold. And you can worry about that when you actually get out with the degree and have an even bigger salary. So our educational system is really set up to encourage as many people as possible to do this. The other thing is that when you get a PhD, you're not necessarily forced into a job like mine. You don't have to be a professor.
A lot of my students right now are getting snatched up by the tech industry. You know, I've got one student who studied differential equations for his PhD thesis, and he got job offers from Google, Amazon, and Snapchat, and he's starting at Google in a few weeks. I have another student who you know, she had postdoc offers from really top universities. She also has an offer from Google, and maybe Facebook too, we'll see. Right? So there are, you know, and that happens to be one industry that is booming right now. So there are a lot of opportunities. These are, you know, you might think that they're only going to hire computer scientists, maybe some electrical engineers, but they're hiring mathematicians maybe who didn't necessarily have the training that they need for their company, but they hire them because they can think and they have ideas. And they can program too. Programming is a good skill to have, I think. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Kinda?
Yeah, FIU doesn't have a doctorate in math, so...
There are other schools.
Right.
Well, but if I might say something, we expect to have it by the fall of next year. There will be a PhD program in mathematics starting the fall of 2016.
Well, so one of the advantages of having the school pay you to go to school is that you get a stipend to live on, which means you don't have to live with your parents. You can move to California, right? Or Washington State, or Minneapolis, or, you know, any place that has a good program. And so if you're interested in going to graduate school, talk to your advisors here about what programs are good for your interests. You know, go online, read, you know, do your homework, read the rankings, you know. But don't worry so much about cost, because you should be getting the school to pay for you if you're going into a PhD. It's not going to be a lot of money, but it's, you know, I mean, as long as your needs are modest, it's doable. I mean, the National Science Foundation gives graduate fellowships to a small number of students, and that program, I think, is now over $30,000 a year to live on. That's you know, and then on top of that, the tuition is paid. Right? So you're not accruing tuition debt, and you're getting some money to pay your rent and some food and things like that. Yeah. Yeah,
I think that here you have two examples that they've gone through that situation. No? I mean, when we finished our PhDs, we didn't have any debt.
No, that's
we were,
right.
I mean, that's a very.
I mean, I had some modest student loans. I was fortunate that my family helped me a lot, and we had some, you know, I didn't have to pay for everything for college, but I did have some student loans when I graduated from undergraduate. And I didn't have to start paying them off until I finished my PhD. And that, at least for the loans I had, that's, you know, so there are some commercial loans that won't have that. So you have to be very careful if you're taking out student loans. But I had sort of the standard ones, and I didn't have to pay until I finished, and then I had a real job, you know. So
my situation was, I mean, you mentioned that the U.S. citizens and residents, but I was a foreigner when I came here with teaching assistantship, and I didn't have to pay any tuition, or they have a small stipend.
That's right. About a third of the PhD students in applied math at UCLA are from other countries. They come in on an F1 visa. They also are supported just like the Americans. They are not eligible for the federal fellowships,
right,
but they are certainly eligible for TA and research assistantships. And at UCLA, they're also eligible for some of our UC fellowships. So for example, my student Hui, who is a Chinese citizen on an F1 visa, got a dissertation year fellowship from UCLA. They are paying for her last year of graduate school because she's very good, and she got a merit-based award. So we have things like that, and I'm sure many of the other campuses have that. Yeah. So, you know, so this is something you should know. Now, if you get an MD, typically you're going to be paying for that. But you can look at programs that combine MD and PhD. They take a while. That's the one drawback is, you know, you don't get something for nothing, right? So you have to take the time to do both degrees. But you know, there is some financial support there as well. So yeah, I would encourage anybody, I assume you're all good students if you're here. So you should all be thinking about a graduate degree. When the time is right. It could be right out of school, it could be after a year or two, just depending on what makes sense. But definitely think about it, think about career paths, and follow your dreams as far as that is concerned.
So hi, I just wanted to thank you for coming today and giving your talk. I think you talked a lot about how math is a unifying science. You can say that you looked at crime rates and also earthquake models and how they were similar. I wanted to ask, as an applied mathematician, what qualifies as a good model, and what do you expect from the data that comes from that model? Do you expect a relationship every time?
Oh, that's a really good question. And I think that question is a little bit specific to the class of models. We work with sort of two general classes of models. One would be more the statistical side of things. And the statisticians, this is not my area, but I work with them. I have collaborators, and they have a lot of very well-known tests that they can do, statistical tests, to study how good the model is, and to compare the model with the data. So if you're interested in that type of modeling, my advice is to take a lot of classes in statistics and talk to your professors in statistics about exactly what you just asked me. Where I have a lot of experience is working with more mechanistic, like the deterministic physics models, and working somewhat with data. And I have to say that I have been in a bit of a luxurious situation in my early career because I worked with laboratory scientists who are very careful about producing, as accurate, reproducible results as they can. And so my role, largely when I collaborated with experimentalists, was to come up with a theory to explain the phenomenon that they were seeing in their data. And that was a heck of a lot of fun, to be able to see a very new and unexpected behavior in a science experiment, and to sit down and write down an equation that nobody had studied on the mathematical side either, and to work out the theory for that. And I've done this a few times in my life, and it was just very exciting to be able to, here's a new equation, let's do the math on this. Look at this. The equation and the behavior suggests this is going to happen, we could prove it. And then we go back, and it explains exactly what's happening in the experiment. So I had some experience like that in the first 10 years of my career, and it just made me very happy that we could somehow use our training in advanced mathematics to be able to take something that looked like a complete mystery and say, no, it's not a mystery, it's supposed to do this, and this is why. And that was a lot of fun for me. Not every science problem out there requires graduate level mathematics, I will say that. But there are a lot of them, and that's what we're trained to do. And so it's kind of fun to partner with the scientists who don't have quite the training that we have, but are experts in the science, and we can work together and figure it out. I really like doing that. Yeah, sure.
Hi, my name is Mario Perez. I'm a visiting lecturer for the QB program, and I often tell my students that naturally getting an advanced degree is great for advancing your career and your job and all these other things that we want to do, but also you can't overlook the fact that it enhances your quality of life and all the things you do. You will go on to the circles of the people you keep, the experiences that you have, you will see with different eyes. It will make your life much more meaningful, rich, because you have a greater background, greater education. You can connect things, make connections that you would have not otherwise been able to make.
This is true.
That is another caveat, that's like the icing on the cake, these other things.
Yeah.
That you'll spend the rest of your life interacting with people that you're getting used to interacting with now. So if you could, anything you'd like to elaborate on that, please, by all means.
Yeah, I try to stay a little bit away from, sort of the material side of this, but it's true. I mean, the salaries are higher with advanced degrees, and certainly the circle of people you interact with is going to be different. But I think, most students, at least if you're not doing this, you should be checking out different career paths and basic things like what the salaries are like in those career paths. You know, not just the impact that you can make, but also the lifestyle that you're going to have. Yeah, I mean, I have to say that when I was younger, I also toyed with the idea of going into business. I was thinking about starting a PhD in applied mathematics, and I got a call from my dad, of all people, who is an experimental physicist, also a professor. He said, you know, you're really talented with math. If you went and got an MBA, you could probably make a huge amount of money and live much more comfortably than a professor would. And I thought, yeah, that's true, but I'm having a lot of fun doing what I'm doing. So, okay, so this brings up maybe, this isn't going to be the answer you were thinking, but I married somebody with an MBA. My husband, who I knew from, you know, a young age, we were in college together, decided to go to MIT and get an MBA from the Sloan School. So I thought, okay, there we go, I've got that covered. You know, but my calling was really in what I'm doing. I'm very happy with what I'm doing, and it's true. If I got into finance, I mean, I know people who I went to school with who went into finance from a PhD, you know, who did very, very well financially, and I'm happy for them, and I'm also happy with my life too. So I think you sort of have to balance the material side with the job description. You don't want to take a job just because it earns a lot of money, but you do want to be aware of that aspect because, you know, you have to live, you have to eat, you have to pay rent. And yeah, I think that's enough said. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah.
Thank you
Sure.
very much,
Yeah.
Dr. Bertozzi, for your talk and this interview. If one thing has emerged from both the interview and the talk is that mathematics is a really incredible tool in all sciences, including the social sciences, I think, right? I mean, so I would encourage you guys to understand that, and whenever you have to take those calculus courses in the cubic program, think that sometime they will be useful.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much, Dr.
You're
Bertozzi.
welcome.